Ladies and gentlemen, what you are about to witness is not just a case, it's a story. A story of a young woman with a heart full of dreams, a spirit full of adventure, and a smile that could light up the world. But it's also a story of darkness, betrayal, and unspeakable tragedy. Her name was Grace Emmy Rose Millane, and her story shook the world. From the bustling city of Auckland, New Zealand, to the far reaches of the globe, her name became synonymous with a search for justice, a cry for change, and a call for compassion. She was a British tourist whose disappearance in Auckland, New Zealand in December 2018 ignited a global outcry for justice. Her story is one of adventure, love, and an unbreakable spirit, but it is also one of unspeakable darkness and unimaginable tragedy. A man by the name of Jesse Shane Kempson was charged with her murder just days after her disappearance. Despite the suppression order placed on his name by New Zealand courts, the world learned of his heinous crimes and Grace's tragic fate. Kempton stood trial claiming that her death occurred during consensual sex. But after a 3-week trial, a unanimous guilty verdict was reached, and Kempson was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. But the story doesn't end there. Kempson filed an appeal against his conviction, which was ultimately dismissed by New Zealand's Court of Appeal. And as the suppression order was lifted, it was revealed that Kempson had been convicted on other rape and abuse charges relating to 2 other women. But who was Grace Millane? What happened to her? And why did her story resonate with so many people around the world? In this video, we will take you on a journey through Grace's life, her travels, and the events that led to her untimely death. We will delve into the details of the investigation, the trial, and the aftermath, and explore the impact that Grace's story had had on the world. So sit back, buckle up, and prepare to be moved, because this is the story of Grace Millane, and it is a story that you will never forget. Hailing from the town of Wickford, Essex, Grace had recently graduated from the University of Lincoln with a degree in advertising and marketing. And what better way to celebrate her achievement than with a backpacking tour of the world during her gap year? After spending 6 weeks in South America, Grace arrived in New Zealand for a 2-week stay. Her travels took her all around the Upper North Island, and on the 30th of November, she arrived in Auckland. That evening at 9 p.m. precisely, she was spotted in the vibrant Victoria Street in Auckland's Central Business District. But little did anyone know that this would be the last time Grace would be seen alive in public. Just 15 minutes later, CCTV footage captured her at Sky City, and at 9:41 p.m., she was seen entering the City Life Hotel on Queen Street with a man named Jesse Kempson. And with that, the story of Grace Millane takes a tragic turn, as her fate becomes entwined with that of her killer. The clock ticked by, but Grace's parents didn't hear back from their beloved daughter on her special day. As the hours turned into days, the anxiety grew, and they finally reported her missing on the 3rd day. The hotel where she was staying added to the concern by confirming that she never returned to her room on the night she vanished. Police initially tried to ease the tension by suggesting there was no foul play involved, but their assurances were short-lived. As the investigation intensified, the grim reality set in. Grace was no longer alive. On the 8th of December, the police made a chilling announcement. They were treating the case as a homicide investigation, and it wasn't long before they charged a man named Jesse Kempson with her murder. But it wasn't until a day later that Grace's body was discovered, lying lifeless off Scenic Drive in the Waitakere Ranges, around 12 miles west of central Auckland. The post-mortem examination only added to the heartbreak and horror of the situation. The police launched a massive manhunt, requesting the public's help in tracing the movements of Kempson's rental car and locating a shovel they believed was linked to the inquiry. The days that followed were fraught with tension, fear, and anguish. And through it all, one question remained. How could such a promising young woman's journey end in such a brutal and senseless tragedy? Jesse Shane Kempson was a man with a troubled past. Born and raised in the Wellington region, he had a difficult childhood. After his parents separated when he was only 9 years old, he was subsequently raised by his father and grandfather while his mother moved overseas. Kempson's father later remarried and had a blended family, which caused Jesse to become estranged from them. Despite this tumultuous upbringing, Kempson found some success in sports while attending Aotea College. He played softball at a regional representative level for multiple teams. However, after leaving school, Kempson struggled to find a suitable career and worked various jobs, including as a bartender and builder and laborer. He also spent 3 years living in Sydney, Australia between 2013 and 2016. Kempson's criminal record was also a cause for concern. He had a previous conviction for drunk driving in New Zealand and had been arrested for disorderly behavior in both Auckland and Sydney. Additionally, his paternal grandfather alleged that Kempson had fathered a child while living in Sydney, but this claim is disputed by other relatives. Despite these warning signs, it was still shocking when Kempson was taken into custody on 8 December 2018, charged with the murder of Grace Millane. Kempson had also been staying at the City Life Hotel in central Auckland, and he appeared in the Auckland District Court 2 days later to face the charges. The trial revealed a darker side to Kempson's character. He claimed that Millane had died during consensual sex, but the evidence showed that he had strangled her to death. Now, let's move on to the part for which we all eagerly wait while watching any crime story. So, the trial for this monster began on November 4th, 2019, with the selection of the jury. He had previously entered a plea of not guilty, and the trial was expected to last 5 weeks. Crown solicitor Brian Dickey argued that Kempson had strangled Millane to death after their Tinder date.
Somebody will have to explain to me what is. This is not sex play. This is not restricted breath games. This is holding a person's neck and throat and wrapping your hand or hands around it, however you did it, for an extended period of time, feeling their struggle as she must have struggled for her life, and then going limp and into unconsciousness, and you carry on.
The Crown also presented evidence that after killing her, Kempson conducted several internet searches on how to dispose of bodies and viewed pornography. Dickey argued that Kempson calmly and callously disposed of Millane's body and other evidence, and then created a labyrinth of storytelling and lies to cover his tracks.
I'm telling you, that bag is still in my room.
What's in it?
Nothing. Nothing's in it.
What was in it then?
Nothing.
Where did it come from?
The warehouse.
Which warehouse?
Atrium.
When did you buy it?
That day, because I was going to have to move all my stuff out.
The prosecution presented 3 female witnesses whom Kempson had met through Tinder, who testified that he enjoyed masochistic and bondage sex, including choking. The Crown also presented security camera footage of Kempson and Millane, including Kempson renting a carpet cleaning machine at the Countdown supermarket in Quay Street. Pathologist Simon Stables, a Crown expert witness, testified that a post-mortem examination of Millane's body had found bruising consistent with someone who had been restrained and asphyxiated.
If you look at your own neck, there's a very broad band of muscle which comes down the side of your neck, called sternomastoid muscle. So the bruising was to the midline of that, or just over more towards the right. There's been sufficient pressure in that place for a sufficient period of time and for sufficient force for that bruising to occur. The bruising wouldn't occur, I don't think, with a sort of a gentle pressure on the neck. It has to be something a bit more forceful than that.
Millane's post-mortem blood alcohol concentration was measured at 106 milligrams of alcohol per 100 milliliters of blood, over the legal driving limit of 50 milligrams per 100 milliliters. The defense team, led by Ian Brookie, argued that Millane's death was the result of a consensual sexual misadventure between Kempson and Millane. They alleged that Millane had an interest in bondage and sadomasochism and had asked Kempson to choke her during a consensual sex game, which went wrong. While acknowledging that Kempson had tried to hide and bury the victim's body, they contended that he had panicked.
The defendant freaked out. And once a person makes that call and they don't press 111 on their phone, they don't dial it, you're committed, aren't you? How do you turn back from that? And with every step he takes along that path, it's harder and harder to come back. What he did afterwards is irrelevant to those key issues. And it's a dangerous, dangerous distraction.
The defense's expert witness, pathologist Fintan Garavan, contested the Crown's autopsy evidence, claiming that her injuries were consistent with a consensual sex act due to the lack of defensive wounds on Millane's body. Garavan also alleged that the victim's alcohol consumption could have contributed to her death. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury, which consisted of 7 women and 5 men, returned a guilty verdict on November 22, 2019, after deliberating for 5 hours. The verdict was welcomed by Millane's parents, David and Gillian. Several members of the jury reportedly wept following the verdict. In New Zealand, murder carries a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 10 years, except when such a sentence would be manifestly unjust, e.g. mercy killings. Judges have discretion to order a longer non-parole period. On February 21, 2020, Kempson was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. On March 18th, it was reported that Kempson would appeal his conviction and sentence at the Court of Appeal. The appeal hearing began in Auckland on August 6, 2020. On December 18, 2020, the Court of Appeals dismissed the appeal, although the Supreme Court ordered that name suppression should remain in place until further court order. That same day, it was reported that taxpayers had paid more than New Zealand dollars. Not just this, the trial of Jesse Kempson sparked a fierce debate on the issue of name suppression in New Zealand's legal system. During his initial court appearance, Kempson was denied name suppression, but his defense team appealed this decision, which led to an interim suppression order of 20 working days. However, the order could not be enforced on media outlets outside of New Zealand, and many overseas publications, especially in the UK, published Kempson's name, triggering a backlash from some quarters. Google also included Kempson's name in an email it sent to subscribers of its newsletters on trending topics in New Zealand, stating that his name had been searched more than 100,000 times in the country. The foreign media was criticized by Justice Minister Andrew Little and the New Zealand Bar Association for endangering Kempson's right to a fair trial. Kempson was remanded in custody and pleaded not guilty in January 2019 when he appeared in the Auckland High Court with his identity remaining suppressed pending an appeal. The appeal was heard in February 2019, with the judge reserving his decision, which meant the order remained in force until the decision was made public. The New Zealand police also investigated several alleged breaches of the suppression order, and a businessman was ultimately prosecuted for such a breach in February 2020. Leo Malloy initially pleaded not guilty but changed his plea to guilty in June 2020. He was sentenced to 350 hours of community service and a fine of 15,000 New Zealand dollars in April 2021. Kempson was formally identified on the 22nd of December 2020 after the Supreme Court of New Zealand rejected his appeal for continued name suppression. It was also revealed that Kempson had been convicted of 9 charges of rape, sexual violation, threatening to kill, and assault on 2 separate sexual violence trials before a judge in October and November 2020 that were independent of the Millane case. The revelation of his past convictions raised concerns about how New Zealand's legal system handled sexual violence cases and the issue of name suppression. The case was highlighted all over the world, and we got reactions from many places, like the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, publicly apologized to the Millane family, saying, "Your daughter should have been safe here, and she wasn't." The emotional press conference saw Ardern close to tears. The University of Lincoln, where Millane studied, expressed its deep sadness at her untimely death. In a poignant tribute, Auckland's Sky Tower and Harbour Bridge were lit up in the shape of a white ribbon for 4 days following Millane's death. Candlelight vigils were also held in various locations around New Zealand. However, some journalists criticized the media's coverage of Millane's death, pointing out that it was an example of missing white woman syndrome, where media attention is given to typically white, conventionally attractive females from middle-class backgrounds who are depicted as innocent and angelic. Despite the criticism, hundreds of people attended Millane's funeral at Brentwood Cathedral in Essex on January 10, 2019. In November 2019, Radio New Zealand broadcaster Colin Peacock called out the conduct of foreign media in both the Grace Millane and Amber Rose Rush murder trials, highlighting their disregard for New Zealand's name suppression orders, which posed a threat to the fair right trials of the defendants. Meanwhile, the Otago Daily Times emphasized that Millane's murder highlighted the fact that women in New Zealand were statistically more likely to fall victim to violent crimes than men. The Guardian's Cian Norris also criticized the use of rough sex as a murder defense in late February 2020, describing it as a grotesque victim blaming. All of these reactions show how Millane's death has left a lasting impact on the people of New Zealand, raising important issues such as media representation, women's safety, and fair right trials. As we reflect on the tragic death of Grace Millane, it's important to remember that her case is not unique. Violence against women is a pervasive issue that affects countless lives around the world. The unprecedented reaction from the New Zealand public to Millane's death serves as a reminder of the power of collective action and the need for continued efforts to bring about changes. As we move forward, let's not forget the words of the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. "Your daughter should have been safe here, and she wasn't. It's up to all of us to work towards a world where safety is not a privilege, but a basic human right. Only then can we honor the memory of Grace Millane and all those whose lives have been impacted by gender-based violence."